I reached the trailhead later than I meant to, after the sun had already slipped behind the firs and left the world with that pearly dusk where everything looks like it's remembering itself. The sign said Bracken Hollow Loop, 6.2 kilometers, a tidy circle with bright blazes and a promise of an easy walk. I'd picked it because it was close to the rental cabin and I'd been inside too long, the quiet buzzing in my ears. A stretch, a stroll, a little air, that was all I wanted. The gravel lot was empty except for my car. I stood with the door open, listening. The forest wore the hush of a church, every sound held back by the damp. I pulled on my jacket, tossed a thermos into my pack, and started down the path. The first 100 meters were a corridor of alder and fern, the ground padded with needles, the air faintly sweet with rot. A cold breath slid through the trees and lifted the hair on my arms. I told myself it was the temperature drop you always feel under dense canopy. I told myself not to be dramatic. But the forest was different here. In the cabin, the woods were a postcard out the window. Here, they were a deep organ note, and I felt it in my ribs. I walked. My boots learned the rhythm of roots and stones. The blazes were a jagged thread of white paint on bark. I counted them without meaning to, the way you count stairs in a long flight, just to prove there's an end. Every so often something creaked high up, a stiff, hinge-like sound from branches shifting. I'd hear a second creak that answered the first, like a question and a reply. I took out my phone for the trail map, but the screen pulsed and went black, then came back with the time wrong by 9 minutes. When I turned the brightness down, a reflection surfaced faintly in the glass. My eyes stretched wider and darker than they were, as if the phone were a window into a dimmer world that almost overlapped this one. I locked it and put it away. The path split at a carpet of damp leaves. The left branch looked more worn. The right shouldered toward thicker trees where the blazes were closer together. I hesitated. A branch snapped from somewhere just off the trail. Not a falling twig, but the neat pop of something stepped on by something with weight. Deer? Probably. The sound came again, closer, then stopped abruptly, like someone realizing they'd been overheard. "Hello?" I said, because that's what people in stories say before they die. The forest took the word and smoothed it into the rest of the quiet. I picked the left branch. I don't know why. It felt like a small rebellion. It felt like choosing my own way. The ground sloped gently down. The smell changed. The wet green of ferns gave way to a metallic tang, the scent of pennies on a tongue. I touched my lips, tasted copper, and laughed. A small, too loud sound that fell around my feet like dropped marbles. The laughter sounded like someone else's. Keep moving, I told myself. Get your body into the walking and the mind will follow. But as I walked, a new sound threaded itself around my footsteps. A soft brushing that matched my pace, like the hem of a long coat sweeping leaves. When I sped up, it did too. When I stopped, it sighed to a halt. I spun around. My headlamp wasn't on. I was saving battery, and the light from the sky filtered down in a weak lattice. The path behind me was empty, but the ferns on either side leaned inward as if just released from a weight. I clicked on the headlamp and washed the beam back and forth. The light snagged on lichen, on a torn plastic flag fluttering from a sapling, on a knot of roots like a clenched hand. I found nothing that could have made the sound. I told myself it was my jacket brushing my pack, tested it by shifting my shoulders. The sound came again. It did not resemble the sound of nylon on nylon. A blaze on a birch appeared ahead. Only when I reached it, the paint wasn't white, but a grayish, greasy smear that shimmered like oil. I put the lamp close. There were fingerprints in it, long and narrow. I felt myself breathe out slowly, as if not to startle. I took 3 steps back, hating that whatever had touched the tree was human-sized. Deer and wind don't leave prints. The forest had settled around me, and in that settling, I heard something I'd missed before. A thin, distant shooshing, like a river. I felt relief. Rivers are boundaries, markers, sane things on a map. I headed toward the sound, moving through a tight stand of fir where each trunk wore its own small gray beard. The shooshing grew louder, then took on shape, turned itself into words just vague enough to be deniable. Not that way. The mind finds patterns in white noise, I told myself. That's all language is. But the sense of being addressed was a weight on my shoulders. The voice, if it was a voice, carried a sour smell, like old clothing that had been stored damp. I quickened my pace and stepped into a small clearing. The river revealed itself as not a river at all, but whined, combing through a patch of dead reeds around a shallow pool. The water was still enough to hold a crooked moon. I felt watched. When I leaned to see my reflection, the headlamp flared on the water and blinded me. I squinted, and the afterimage followed me as I drifted around the pool. The reeds brushed my jeans with a sound like whispering silk. Something darker than the dark stood across the clearing. I didn't see it arrive. It was simply there, one shadow among others, but wrong in its edges. It was taller than me and narrow like a doorway, as if the night had cut out a person-shaped hole and propped it up. When I stepped left, it stepped right. We tested each other, gliding in a slow, inadvertent dance. I raised the lamp. The beam went through it, struck the trees behind, and returned. The thing didn't cast a shadow. It merely interrupted the night. My mouth dried out so thoroughly that a spark would have found tinder there. "Hey," I said softly, because fear makes idiots of us. The word left me, crossed the clearing, and fell at the thing's feet like a coin you know you'll never find again. It moved, not forward, not back, but nearer, the way a cold thought slides down your spine. My head filled with a light, prickling static. I took a step back and found the pool at my heels. The reeds tickled my calves. I could have turned and run. I could have crashed back through the alder and ferns and found the loop and the car and the cabin and the cheap curtains and the lamp you turn on with a chain. Only I couldn't. I felt arranged. I felt like one piece in a pattern I hadn't noticed until it closed over me. The thing tilted its head, or the night bent around it in a way that resembled that motion. The lamp flickered. In the strobe of it, the thing elongated, thinned, then snapped back. My breath hitched. I thought wildly of old stories where names mattered, where you could ruin something by calling it correctly. I didn't know its name. It already knew mine. It said it without saying it, with the rumor of wind and the hush of long grass. Come on, then. The lamp went out. My hands shook so hard I could hear the batteries clatter inside the casing. It was not entirely dark. The clearing held the diluted light of a clouded moon. And in that not dark, the thing became less a shape than a brightness thrown into reverse. It was the absence of the world. I felt for the thermos in my pack, the stupid anchor to the ordinary I'd brought with me, as if tea could ward off the night. My fingers closed around the metal, and the heat of it shocked me. I hadn't expected it to stay warm this long. I unscrewed the lid, and steam lifted in a pale ghost. The smell of bergamot cut through the copper taste in my mouth. The thing shifted, as if startled by the sudden proof that there was still a human logic at work here. I poured, spilling some on my knuckles. The pain was clean, useful. I held the little silver cup up like an offering. I don't know why. It felt like the right gesture in a place that had rules I didn't yet understand. For a moment, one brief, absurd moment, I thought the thing would take the cup. It leaned. The reeds sighed. The tea trembled. And then the surface of the pool puckered as if an invisible drop had fallen into it, and my reflection blurred, and behind my reflection, deeper and a second too slow, another face resolved. Mine, but slack in a way I'd never seen. My mouth dropped open, and the reflection's mouth caught up. I turned my head. The reflection followed, then corrected, like a video buffering on bad service. Not a river, I thought, a mirror, not water, a door. The thing across from me, the cutout, the hole, widened, and the reflection in the pool straightened. I watched myself lift the headlamp in the water's world while my hands remained still above it. I watched myself smile. Not warm, not kind. A smile I had never tried on my own face because it wasn't mine to wear. "Stop," I said, and the reflection mouthed stop a beat late, then smiled again. A ripple ran through the water that didn't touch the reeds. Somewhere beyond the clearing, something moved in a long, deliberate way, like a person dragging a stick through grass. The night smelled now of iron and wet stone and that sour, stored damp scent, like a borrowed coat that doesn't belong to your body. The thing crossed the clearing without crossing it. It joined the reflection the way hands join in prayer, and the two became one picture. Me, standing across from me, wearing the light like a crown, a tether of thin brightness between our chests. I felt the pull. I felt the shape of a choice that wasn't a choice at all. There are thresholds you don't understand until your foot is already on them, weight committed. Not that way, the wind hissed again, or the rush of my blood interpreted it so. But the command came too late to be useful. The pattern had already decided me. I threw the tea. It was a ridiculous act, a child's tantrum against the night. The hot liquid arced, caught that tether of weird brightness, and with a sound like ice cracking on a lake, the light tore. The thing flinched, its edges fraying into threads that shivered. The reflection in the pool smeared like wet paint, then snapped back, furious. I ran. The body remembers how, even when the head goes stupid. The path sucked at my boots, dragged, branches clutched. The blazes came too fast, and then not at all. I felt the forest lean, as if its very architecture had changed to encourage a certain direction and close off others. The whispering followed not from behind, but from beside, then ahead, like a rumor that outruns you. Come on, then. It was coaxing now, almost amused. I didn't recognize this part of the trail. The trees pressed close, their bark scaled with old scars, the path braided and unbraided. Twice I ended up at the same mossy log that wore my boot print already. Twice I circled out of the same small clearing with the same ring of low, thorny bushes. Panic sat in my throat, a hard seed. I swallowed, and it didn't move. My lamp flickered back to life in a weak, juddering halo that confused more than it clarified. I stopped because I had to. I closed my eyes because I was afraid to see. I made my breath into a metronome because my heart had become a broken drum. Listen, I told myself, not to the wrong things. Listen for the car on the road, for a plane, for something that belongs to your life. But I heard only the forest's interior sounds. Sap creeping, beetles rummaging, some distant knocking like a woodpecker that worked in code. And under that, like bass under melody, the very slow hum of the place itself, so low that if I named it, I knew I'd never be able to stop hearing it. A thought rose through that hum like a bubble. You came here. You opened the door. I don't think it was my thought. I opened my eyes to a tunnel of trees. At the far end stood a shape like a wooden frame, a simple gate of 2 uprights and a crossbar, lashed with vine. It hadn't been there before. It shouldn't have been anywhere. Beyond it, the forest looked lighter, as if the sky was holding on to one thin line of dusk. Okay, I said, because sometimes you can bargain with a hallway by admitting it exists. I walked toward the gate. The closer I came, the more I realized it wasn't built from cut wood. The uprights were 2 saplings bent inward and convinced to hold by the stubbornness of growth. The crossbar was a pair of branches whose ends had fused not by rope, but by time. There were scraps of cloth caught in the bark, faded plaid, a shred of yellow knit, a bright thread that looked like the edge of a child's mitten. I reached out to touch the upright. The bark was cool and slightly damp. My finger came away with a smear of gray. The gray glittered faintly, the same greasy shimmer as the false blaze. From behind me, a footstep. No, not that simple. The idea of a footstep, the mind's filling in of a pause in its own noise. I stepped through the gate. The air changed. The copper taste thinned to something like snow. The whispering stopped. The headlamp brightened. I turned in a small circle, ready to laugh again in that brittle way that never helps, ready to cry, ready to sit down and be done, all the useless options crowding my throat. On the far side of the gate, the forest was recognizably itself again. The blazes, real white now, lead away in sane intervals. The trail widened and remembered how to be a trail. Somewhere ahead, far but present, a car hissed past on wet asphalt. I could have knelt and kissed the dirt. I hurried. The trees thinned. My breath steamed. The parking lot appeared like a stage set suddenly lit. My car waited where I had left it, very slightly more dear than it had ever been. I opened the door and stood breathing the smell of upholstery and old coffee and faintly pine-scented cleaner. I climbed in, shut the door, and locked it because it felt like the only spell I knew. I put my hands on the steering wheel. They left gray smears. My chest folded in, a neat little collapse. I wiped my fingers on my jeans. The gray didn't transfer. It had already decided where it belonged. In the rearview mirror, my face looked like my face. My eyes were my eyes. But behind them sat something patient, as if I'd brought home a guest who preferred to wait in the foyer, hat in hand, polite as winter. I started the engine. The radio came on with a burst of static that resolved into a song I didn't know I knew, and then into static again. I drove out of the lot. The forest slipped away in the side mirror, too fast and then not fast enough. Back at the cabin, I turned on every light without apology. I put the thermos on the counter and unscrewed the lid. The tea inside had cooled and a skin had formed, a thin wrinkled film that mirrored back a tiny ceiling light, a tiny version of my head. I tilted the cup. The reflection lagged, then caught up. I set the thermos down very carefully. I scrubbed my hands with hot water and soap until the skin reddened. The gray in the creases didn't budge. Not a stain then, a mark. Around midnight, the cabin settled, a house's normal creaks and sighs, but in the settling, I heard that same gentle shushing. Not quite wind, not quite words. I lay on my back and listened to it braid through the ordinary noises and the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the baseboard heater. A moth fluttered against the window, wanting in. On the phone, the time slipped forward and then back 9 minutes and then forward again, trying to choose a version of the night it preferred. In the dark glass, my reflection smiled late. I turned the phone face down. If there's a twist, it's not this, that the forest is hungry or haunted or hates to be crossed. It's smaller and meaner. The twist is that it knows exactly how much of your attention it needs to take root. Not a lot. Just the bit you give it when you wonder whether the shadow in the corner is a coat or a person. Just the bit you give it when you listen too long to a sound that could be wind, could be words. When I finally slept, I dreamed I was walking a loop, 6 kilometers painted neat on a sign, a tidy circle that never closes. The blazes appeared at the precise moment I needed them to, then melted gray and oily under my fingers. In the dream, I waited at a gate made from living trees while someone, me, not me, caught up to join me, and when our shadows touched, they held. I woke to the sound of reeds in a wind that wasn't blowing, and the taste of copper on my tongue, and the delicate, deliberate sensation of something testing the latch on the door. Not to force it, not yet, only to learn how it works. In the morning, if morning came, and I think it will, because the world is stubborn in its turning, I will drive into town and sit somewhere with people and the clink of mugs and voices that belong to no forest. I will tell myself not to look for my reflection in the window, to keep my eyes on my hands. I will order tea and watch the steam lift in pale ghosts and not think of offering it to anything that can lean without moving. If I'm lucky, it will stay on the other side of the door. If I'm not, it will open from the inside, polite as winter, hat in hand, and say my name the way the reeds said it, and I will look up too late to avoid smiling back. Either way, when the wind rises this afternoon, you might hear it too, not that way. Or perhaps it's only me telling you what the forest told me, but a beat late so the pattern can close.